My parents threw me out over a false accusation. Cleared my name, but fixing the damage, that's another story. It was a Saturday when my world started unraveling. Saturdays were supposed to be easy, quiet. My parents had always treated weekends like sacred family time, a break from the chaos of work and school, a chance to regroup. That morning, I'd woken up late, relishing the rare luxury of sleeping in. I was halfway through a bowl of cereal when I noticed the silence. It wasn't the comfortable kind that came with lazy mornings, it was heavy, oppressive. Mom and Dad were sitting at the dining table, and I could feel their eyes on me before I even turned to look at them. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice wavered. "Sit down," Dad said, his voice unusually stern. My stomach twisted. I set the bowl on the counter and crossed the room, my footsteps feeling too loud in the silence. The tension in the air was suffocating. "What's going on?" I asked as I slid into a chair. Neither of them answered right away. Mom's eyes were red, like she'd been crying. Dad's expression was stone cold, his jaw tight. Dad was the first to speak. "We need to talk about something." There's a moment right before everything goes wrong when you can feel the world teetering, like the ground is about to give way beneath you. This was that moment. "Last night," Dad began, his voice low, "we got a call from Mrs. Harper." My stomach sank. Mrs. Harper was our neighbor, the kind of person who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing her opinions. But what could she possibly have to say about me? "She said," Dad continued, his eyes boring into mine, "that she saw you sneaking into their yard late at night. That you went into their garage and left with something." I blinked, stunned. "What?" Mom spoke up then, her voice shaky. "Did you take something from the Harper's house?" "What?" "No," I said, my voice rising. "I didn't go near their house. I've been home all night." Dad's face darkened. "Don't lie to us, Josh." "I'm not lying," I insisted, my heart pounding. "She said she saw you," Mom said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "She's sure it was you." "Well, she's wrong," I said, frustration bubbling up inside me. "I didn't do anything." It didn't matter what I said. Mom kept crying, and Dad kept glaring at me like I was a criminal. They didn't even seem to hear me. "We raised you better than this," Dad said, shaking his head. "Stealing from a neighbor. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for us?" "I didn't steal anything," I yelled, standing up. "I don't even know what she's talking about." "Then why would she say it was you?" Dad shot back. "I don't know," I said, throwing up my hands. "Maybe she saw someone else and thought it was me. Or maybe she's just making it up because she doesn't like me." Dad's face hardened. "You really think she'd make something like this up?" "Yes, or maybe she just made a mistake." "I don't know, but I didn't do it." Mom stood then, her voice trembling. "Josh, we just want you to tell us the truth." "I am telling the truth," I said, feeling tears prick at my eyes. "Why don't you believe me?" The conversation spiraled from there, if you could even call it a conversation. It felt more like being on trial, except no one cared about evidence or facts. My parents had already decided I was guilty, and nothing I said was going to change their minds. Dad finally stood, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "We can't have this kind of behavior in our house." "What are you saying?" I asked, my chest tightening. He crossed his arms, his expression unyielding. "Until you're ready to own up to what you've done and make it right, you're not welcome here." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "You're kicking me out over something I didn't even do." "We don't know what to believe," Mom said quietly, her eyes full of hurt, "but we can't ignore this." "You're supposed to believe me," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm your son, but it didn't matter." Dad walked to the door and opened it, his message clear. I packed a bag in a daze, throwing clothes and essentials into my backpack while my mind raced. How could this be happening? My own parents, the people who were supposed to have my back no matter what, were throwing me out over some baseless accusation. As I walked toward the door, Mom tried to hug me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said, my voice breaking. Her face crumpled, but she didn't try again. I turned to Dad, hoping for some sign of hesitation, some last-minute change of heart. But his expression was set, his eyes cold. "Let us know when you're ready to be honest," he said. I didn't reply. I just walked out, the door closing behind me with a finality that felt like the end of everything. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching my bag, unsure of what to do. I had no plan, no place to go. My friends wouldn't understand, and I couldn't stomach the thought of explaining what had happened, not when I didn't even fully understand it myself. The only thing I knew was that I hadn't done anything wrong, and somehow, I was going to prove it. For days, I drifted between friends' couches and the cheapest motel I could afford, replaying the conversation with my parents over and over. No matter how many times I went through it, it didn't make sense. Why would Mrs. Harper accuse me of something I didn't do? Why would my parents believe her so easily? I was angry at my parents for throwing me out without proof. Angry at Mrs. Harper for turning my life upside down. But more than that, I was determined to clear my name. The first step was to figure out what Mrs. Harper claimed she saw. I hadn't stolen anything, but someone had, and they must have looked enough like me to convince her I was the culprit. I went to the Harper's house late one night when the lights were out and the neighborhood was quiet. Sneaking around wasn't my style, but if Mrs. Harper could accuse me of being a thief, I figured I had nothing to lose by acting the part. I found the side gate to her yard unlocked and slipped inside. The garage was closed, but I noticed something strange. The side door had been forced open, the lock scratched and bent. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures, careful not to make a sound. Whoever had broken into the Harper's garage had left evidence I could use to prove it wasn't me. The next morning, I went to Mrs. Harper's house and rang the doorbell. My hands were shaking as I stood there, but I refused to back down. She answered after a few moments, her face twisting into a frown when she saw me. "What do you want?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I need to talk to you," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "About what happened the other night." She hesitated but eventually stepped aside, letting me into the foyer. "I didn't take anything from your garage," I said, pulling up the photos on my phone, "but someone did. Look at this." I handed her the phone, showing her the pictures of the forced lock. Her face paled as she looked at them. I didn't notice that," she admitted, her voice wavering. "Exactly," I said. "You saw someone, but it wasn't me. Whoever it was broke in, and if you think about it, why would I need to break into a garage when I live 2 doors down? It doesn't make sense." Mrs. Harper's brow furrowed, and I could see the doubt creeping into her expression. "But I was sure it was you. It was dark, but they were about your height, your build." "Exactly," I said again. "It was someone else who just happened to look like me. And because you were so sure, you didn't even think to check for evidence." She looked away, her guilt plain on her face. Armed with Mrs. Harper's reluctant admission that she might have been wrong, I went back to my parents' house. I stood on the porch, staring at the door I'd been thrown out of, my heart pounding in my chest. When Mom opened the door, her face crumpled with emotion. "Josh," she said, her voice breaking, "we've been so worried." "Have you?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. She stepped aside, letting me in. Dad was sitting at the dining table, his jaw tight when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I'm here to clear my name," I said, setting my phone on the table and pulling up the photos. Mrs. Harper was wrong. Someone broke into her garage, but it wasn't me. "Look at this." I showed them the pictures, then told them everything I'd said to Mrs. Harper. By the time I finished, Mom was in tears, and Dad looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "I'm sorry," Mom said, reaching for my hand. "We should have listened to you." "You think?" I said, yanking my hand away. "You threw me out over a rumor. You didn't even ask for proof." "We made a mistake," Dad said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I'm sorry, son. Truly." Their apologies didn't make me feel better. If anything, they made me feel worse. My parents had turned their backs on me when I needed them most, and now they expected me to forgive them because the truth had come out. Do you have any idea what the last week has been like for me? I said, my voice shaking. Sleeping on couches, not knowing where I'd go next, trying to figure out how to fix something I didn't even do, all because you couldn't trust me? We were wrong, Mom said again, tears streaming down her face. But we want to make it right. I don't know if you can, I said. Dad looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. What do you want us to do? I want you to think about how you'd feel if it were the other way around, I said. If I threw you out without a second thought, how would you feel? Would you trust me again? Neither of them had an answer for that. I left that day without promising anything. I needed time to think, to decide if I could ever trust them again. Mrs. Harper came by later to apologize in person, but her words felt hollow. The damage had been done. It's been a few months now, and things still aren't the same. I see my parents occasionally, but there's a distance between us that wasn't there before. Maybe, in time, we'll rebuild what was lost. Or maybe we'll stay fractured, like a vase glued back together but never quite whole. All I know is that trust, once broken, doesn't come back easily. And some wounds take longer to heal than others. If you like the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this.